8:02 on your Wednesday morning. Good morning, Jeff, hanging out in the KIX 96.5 studios. We love having guests on the show, and today we're heading to Connecticut to chat with singer-songwriter John Krondes. John reestablished the adored Memphis sound with new recordings of Elvis's hits that started with his father's mega hit, The End with the Jordanaires. John's just released a brand new single called A Dream for Peace that's one of the most downloaded songs in the world. Yeah, we're stoked to have John on the show. First, John, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all your listeners and the support around the world. It's really a blessing, and as I had mentioned to Jeff, we're on a mission, and I owe this to a lot of people that dedicated their lives, including Joe Esposito, who was Elvis Presley's best friend in life. He was the best man at his wedding. He was Elvis Presley's road manager for 20 years and did everything. And Joe discovered me and heard the very first recordings I did with Elvis Presley's TCB band that he toured with till he died. And Joe Esposito had called me to Los Angeles. I mean, literally, word traveled fast. A day after I finished that session in Nashville, I got a call from Joe Esposito on his cell phone as I was leaving Newark Airport to go back home in Connecticut. And literally, that's how it happened. I don't have any idea how he heard about it and wanted me to come to Los Angeles the next week. He set up a recording studio and some other industry people and media to hear those songs. And after the first song he heard on that reel, he grabbed my arm and started to cry. He said, I closed my eyes and I thought I heard Elvis. And he said, I can't believe this. He says, I'm going to help you. I'm in. And he dedicated the rest of his life. He spent the last 10 years of his life basically starting new recording sessions, starting all these wonderful new recordings with all the people that played and sang with Elvis on new recordings. Joe Esposito died in 2016, and actually a couple of the other producers, famous producers in Memphis, John Hampton, that recorded ZZ Top and the Gin Blossoms, Stevie Ray Vaughan, etc., and they all died within 6 months of each other at the end of 2015-16.
Wow.
But I had a lot of believers all along and was urged to keep going and keep recording and starting more songs. As Joe Esposito had told media when he was alive, that this project is on God's time, and when the world starts to hear about this is going to be bigger than life, and people are going to expect and want to hear certain songs that were Elvis's favorite songs that fans loved and adored, made new again with new arrangements to carry those through for future generations. And that's basically what we're doing.
Yeah, that's what he's been doing. John's got a very interesting and amazing story. Just kind of what he told you. Your dad, though, had an in with Elvis. He wrote The End, which was a huge hit, covered by Nancy Sinatra, the Bee Gees, many others. But Elvis sang that song to Priscilla when they first met, and it pretty much took off from there.
Yes. Well, actually, it was, I don't know if it was the reverse, but Earl Grant.
Yeah, Earl Grant did the song.
With that song.
Yeah.
Right. He was the first artist that recorded that song in 1958, and it was an instant success. The song was a massive hit all over the world. And Elvis actually chose that song, The End, a.k.a. At the End of a Rainbow, it's also known as, to Priscilla Beaulieu, his future wife, who became Priscilla Presley, on the very night that they met. He was in Germany in the army at that time. And ironically, Joe Esposito, who towards the end of his life finds me and becomes the head of this project and helped get all this going. I didn't even know this until Joe got involved in the project. He told me that not only did he know about it, he says, I was there. It was some big event and a big party in Germany.
Wow.
And he says, I was singing harmony with the rest of his friends with Elvis serenading Priscilla on the night they met. And then here's Joe, decades later, heading this project. And the interesting thing about this, when people ask me, how did you do this, or how did you find these people? I didn't do anything. They found me. From my first recording of The End, which was with the Jordanaires, the minute that song hit radio originally, people started calling me. I had no idea what happened. Even before the song was finished, I had showed it to an arranger, a very famous arranger, George Andrews, who's still involved in the project. And when I played him the piano and my voice, which was the only part of the recording at that point, he laughed, and I cringed. I thought he was going to say, you should try driving a truck or something instead of singing. And he said, do you want to know what I think? And I cringed again, and he laughed, and he said, I love it, and started bursting out laughing. And I for the life of me, I couldn't understand his reaction. And then his next statement was, who's going to sing with you? And I said, George, I'm a little lost. I have no idea what you're talking about. And he pointed at me and said, you need a big godly vocal group like Elvis had, like the Jordanaires. And he started laughing again and hysterically. And then his next statement is, I wonder if they're still alive. And literally about 2 weeks later, I get a call from Sony Music. They had hooked me up with a producer, an old school producer, Dixon Van Winkle, who loved my music and said, let's do a couple more songs. And I get a call back from them saying the Jordanaires heard your song, The End, and they loved it. And they said, if you want to bring John to Las Vegas, that's where they were, doing a Patsy Cline tribute, we'll try a session and see how it goes. And basically, so I don't talk too much, it was magic. From the minute they sang on that song, it was just that magical Memphis sound. And this thing just took its own life from that moment on. And as soon as fans and radio started playing it, all the rest of Elvis's musicians and singers somehow or another heard this and found me and contacted me through somebody else, or a producer, through Sony. Nobody can explain how all these people, everybody that ever played with Elvis and sang with Elvis, all ended up on this project, in which we're still recording. I mean, unfortunately, a few have died since along the way, but it's really a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it's been amazing. If you're an Elvis fan, go check John out. John Krondes, KRONDES.com. He's on Instagram, Facebook. His brand new single, A Dream for Peace. You're going to hear that coming up. Well, how did you get started doing Elvis songs? Did you ever meet Elvis, John?
No, I never met Elvis, but my father did. My father, Jimmy Krondes, along with being a great songwriter, he also was a record executive at RCA Records in New York City, and also at ABC Records in New York City. And it's very interesting, because when Elvis was making his comeback, my father was working at RCA Records. And I remember being literally like 4 or 5 years old, and my father bringing home the 45 to Suspicious Minds. And I loved the record and played it over and over again. And ironically, the song that you're telling fans about, my current single, the second single now that they're distributing around the world, A Dream for Peace, is a medley of the song If I Can Dream that Elvis sang in the 68 comeback special, along with Classical Dream, which is a piece that I wrote that opens and closes the song. But point being, on the record, If I Can Dream is in its entirety the American Sound Studio Band from Memphis, quote, the Memphis Boys, they call them. That's the same exact group of musicians, the same band that recorded Suspicious Minds with Elvis Presley in 1969. And radio stations now all over the world that are getting this news and getting the music are at a loss, as are the listeners, when they play this for them, because the minute you hear this music, even for me and other musicians that come into the studio when we're doing a session and they hear the musician preceding them on the record, can't believe what this sounds like, because it's really kind of similarly what Dolly Parton's doing with her new record and remake of Let It Be. She's going back and drawing from history and has what's left of the Beatles. She's got Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr on a new recording of Let It Be. Oh. And that's electric. Those two songs, my song and Dolly Parton, are going neck and neck, according to the reports, of the most downloaded songs in the world in both adult contemporary and rock format. And they say for very good reason. People can't believe what they're hearing, especially on this recording, A Dream for Peace. This is the American Sound Studio Band that did Suspicious Minds, In the Ghetto, Kentucky Rain, Don't Cry Daddy for Elvis and others. That's the band that played on Neil Diamond's biggest hit, Sweet Caroline, and also B.J. Thomas's big hit, Hooked on a Feeling, along with others. They were the hottest studio band in the United States between 1968 and 1973, with over 125 charted hits. We also have the Jordanaires, the Sweet Inspirations, the Stamps, Imperials, Elvis's horn section, and other players on that recording. So it's people are responding favorably, but also commenting that this kind of sounds like a new Elvis song, and it's inexplicable how this all came together. But when you put all those people back together in the studio on a recording, they're not going to sound like Van Halen. They're going to sound like Elvis.
Yeah.
Because there's a certain style that each one of those players brings to the recording, and the singers. It's really just the whole conglomeration of this. When you hear it and it's finished, there's no other way to call this, but people are saying it's the new Memphis rock. It's the Memphis sound.
Yeah, he's brought back the Memphis sound. Because I was listening to A Dream for Peace last night, and then I went and listened If I Could Dream by Elvis, and yeah, I mean it's pretty close, or you're sounding just like Elvis. And there's a cool video on your website, John, with this Ray Bardani, the producer mixer who did Elvis's stuff, and he's got a cool story where he's like, I mixed this stuff 40 years ago, and now the players are coming back and doing it again, and it's just as good or better nowadays. So it's kind of a weird trip doing it then, and now he's rehashing it now for doing John's mixes. But it's crazy. How did you? I mean, Bobby Ogden, Elvis's piano player, Billy Sanford, his guitarist, DJ Fontana, his first drummer for Elvis, who played with Elvis for like 14 years. All of these guys are coming out and playing with you, John. I mean, how are you digging them out of the woodwork? Or, I mean, do they want? I mean, I imagine they probably are excited and want to do this.
Yeah, it's really and I'm serious in all of us. I'm very religious and inspirational, and my father is in rock and roll heaven, died in 1986, and left me all these unbelievable songs that were never recorded. I mean, obviously some were recorded, like The End and Warm, was Johnny Mathis's first big hit. I'm doing over all these songs that Elvis was supposed to record. I have no idea. And Ray Walker of the Jordanaires has done several radio interviews, and a few other people, and radio stations often ask these questions. How did you guys find each other? And the answer from everyone is, we have no idea, that this was an act of God. And I never dreamed that I would be on a recording with all of the people that played and sang with Elvis, Ray Bardani, from every aspect of the recordings. It's not just the musicians. Ray Bardani is a multi-Grammy award-winning producer. Really what he loves best and does is mixing. That's his art. And how he met me, as I was telling you about Joe Esposito calling me on my cell phone a day after my first session with the PCB band, I got a call from the Hit Factory. That's where I started recording The End. And the manager of the Hit Factory said, there's a producer that wants to meet you and hear your music. His name is Ray Bardani. And he went on to explain to me that he's currently in the studio mixing a second CD for RCA Records with all the original Elvis Presley masters. He mixed the CD compilations 30 number one hits and Second to None, where he took all the original tapes, the raw tapes, and remixed them to make them sound more like today's sound. That's how I met Ray Bardani. He again, listened to the first song and said, this is crazy. He says, I can't believe what I'm hearing. These guys sound like you're saying, and he said in that interview, they sound better than they sounded with Elvis.
Yeah.
And it's like a great wine that's been, sitting in a bottle for the last 30 years. It gets better. And there's no other way to describe this. These are the most unbelievable players in the world. I mean, I'm still working with Bobby Ogden. He's alive and well and looks great. And he's played on several, about probably 30 new songs over the last 2 years during COVID. And we were supposed to be in the studio August 16th. We're starting some more over the next few weeks.
Yeah,
DJ Fontana, unfortunately, died in his sleep in 2018, but was so excited, and it was through an introduction. I mean, I didn't just wake up and say, boy, I want to get DJ Fontana to play on my recordings. Everybody just appeared. It's just the wildest thing on earth. It was just meant to be.
Yeah, it's amazing. Go check him out. He's done over 100 songs of Elvis with all of his old players. You did a song for the Elvis movie, If I Can Dream. I mean, you had everyone that worked with Elvis on the song. It's incredible.
Right. Every single person, and there's more. There's other, younger players too. Because what's happening now, a number of the players unfortunately have passed on, and just a lot of them started to die in 2015. Joe Esposito in 16.
Yeah.
Ronnie Tutt, who is the drummer for the TCB band that you see on, if you watch videos even on YouTube with the Aloha from Hawaii concert, where Elvis playing, that's his most famous concert. That's Ronnie Tutt. He was one of the greatest drummers on earth. Even as a kid, I loved Ronnie Tutt. He was explosive, and he's played on several of my songs. Songs we haven't even finished yet. There's a song that actually radio stations are allowed to play in these types of interviews because they're calling CDX Nashville and some of the promoters. There's a song called, there's a number of them that he sang, Listen for the Wind, which is a song my father wrote with Paul Evans. Paul Evans wrote 5 #1 Elvis hits, and Bobby, he wrote the song Roses Are Red for Bobby Vinton. And we have a new recording of this song, Listen for the Wind, that Elvis heard the demo to in the mid-'70s before he died. I remember hearing that song as a kid and always liked it. And my mother, who just passed 2 years ago, would feed me and find in files and suitcases some songs that my dad did. And, she was always on top of this and loved this and said, you got to show this to the band. So we showed Listen for the Wind to Ronnie Tutt and some of the Elvis musicians. I had a stack of songs when we go to a session. And they're like, great. They heard the demo that Elvis heard. Let's try that. And I just finished mixing that song in the past year with John Nicholson, the producer in Nashville at Hilltop Studio, and it's dynamite. And, we haven't even released, none of this stuff is released, but some stations have done these types of interviews and wanted to play a few things. That's one of the songs they gave them to play. And it's just amazing. You got Elvis' guitar players and Elvis's drummer, Ronnie Tutt, on drums, the Sweet Inspirations, the girls that Elvis sang with, the Jordanaires on the record, Elvis's horn section. It just brings and instills that sound like that Elvis died with. What he put together and the musicians and the bands that he had he was so far ahead of his time. It's sad that he died so young because he was just starting to make great new music.
Yeah, he went way too early. Go check John out, johnkrondes.com. He's on Instagram, Facebook. He's everywhere. This is like from a different power because, it's crazy. This Hollywood News Center that's been promoting you, Caden. Everything is just kind of aligned like the stars. If you go on YouTube, there's a video of like Miss Ukraine talking you up, John. It's crazy, all the people that have been promoting you.
Well, a lot of people are trying to figure me out, and they can't. And, not that I'm holding any secrets. I can't figure out my own life. It's crazy. Yeah. And, I just follow God. And, people tell me, even in my own family, years ago that, what are you doing? You're spending all this money recording these songs. What are you going to do with all this stuff? And I just dismiss it. I really believe I hear my father's word. My father, like Elvis died younger. My father died at 59 and had all these gorgeous songs. And so, if I don't do something with it, who will? And it was really, I owed it to my father. Then all this started to happen. The Jordanaires met me with my father's song, The End, and all these other people appeared. And one of the questions, we do a session, and they say, this is really great. And then the next question would be, do you have any more songs? Oh, I know this player. I know that. I met the American Sound Studio Band through Ronnie Tutt. Ronnie Tutt, in the first session I did with his guys with the TCB band, so I'd like to bring Reggie Young, the guitar player from the American Sound Studio Band, to play with James Burton. It would be great to have 2 guitar players on the session. So during that session, while they're hearing this great music we're making, that was Reggie Young pulled me aside. He said, my guys, the American Sound Studio Band's still around. Do you have any more songs? That was one of my blessings. I was never short for songs, and I'm a songwriter, and I ended up now writing with Paul Evans, who wrote with my father when I was a little kid, and other writers. So there's plenty of songs. Yeah. One of my problems is there's one lifetime for Elvis, my father, and I watch some of these people pass on, and I'm like in high gear trying to figure out how. I've got so many songs and songs that I want to start. How is there enough time in a day or a year even, or a lifetime to keep going? Because promoters say, well, this is fabulous. People are loving this music, but you can't put 3 things out at the same time. That's going to confuse everybody. So, as soon as we peak with whoever's playing this song, A Dream for Peace, If I Can Dream, we have a couple more ready. So that's That's the good blessing.
Yeah, exactly. He's got much more to come. Elvis fans are crazy. His Instagram has over 1 million followers, so go and check him out on Instagram. The psychic John Cohen. This guy says that you've been aligned by the stars. Who is this guy?
John Cohen. He's correct.
John Cohen, yeah.
Don't call him Cohen. There's a difference. He's Irish. But anyway, he's an interesting person. He's a very famous psychic, and he's gotten quite a bit of press outside of what he's talking about with me in the last few months. He actually predicted, which is very sad, by the way, Lisa Marie Presley, Elvis's daughter, for some that don't know, passed away the beginning of January of this year. And John Cohen makes yearly predictions in the end of December for the forthcoming year, and for 2023 predictions, which he made in December 2022. One of his predictions was Lisa Marie Presley's passing. And he's electric right now and getting a lot of press. The Toronto Sun, there's a music entertainment magazine, Music Times, I think it's called, that wrote about him and specifically said this is, bold print eerie, that he was able to foresee that and talked about Lisa Marie's passing and that she would be checking into actually a religious institution is what it was to correct her life. And they're praising him for these predictions. And he's been following my project for the last several years as this thing has been building and showed up at recording sessions in New York. He actually was the resident psychic on the Joe Franklin TV show in New York City for, as of just recently learned, decades. And Joe Franklin, there's all these connections. Joe Franklin knew my father. And Joe Franklin, before he died, became one of my greatest fans. He got the end. He also was a radio DJ on WOR and did a show called Memory Lane and called me and said, I'd like to interview you, like you guys are, and had me come into the studio and said, I love the end. And he said, I knew your father very well. And I remember the end when it first came out. And he was telling his listeners, I was one of the first stations to play The End by Earl Grant. And, broadcast and tapped himself on the back and said, I was one of the first stations to play the John Krondes song, The End, with the Jordanaires. It's great. And that's one of the greatest songs. And it's just funny, the connections with everybody involved and how the psychic became involved. And, some people thought he was nuts talking about I'm connected to Elvis and this and that. And now all of a sudden people are more and more interested in this and asking the same questions. How is this possible? How does this guy John Krondes have all these people on these records and has scores of recordings? How would it even be possible? And everybody was a believer. And Joe Esposito, had no idea he was going to pass on, but just knew there's an expiration date, and he just kept pushing to get as many songs started as possible. And that was always the thing. People just kept wanting to start more recordings, and I kept spending more money, and then you'd pass out. I don't want to talk about the money, but it's not about the money. This is capturing a moment in time that can never be replaced, and that's basically now that this is coming to fruition and people are actually starting to hear this music, they can't believe it and how this is possible. So many people love this music and the Memphis sound. And when Elvis died, there was a lost style of music, just like the Beatles. That's why Dolly Parton is making headlines. People loved that music. Yeah. In the 60s, it was Elvis and the Beatles.
Yeah. John's got the first new recordings since 1977. So go check him out. JohnKrondes.com. He's on Instagram, Facebook. His brand new single, A Dream for Peace, is out now, and you're going to hear it right now. Well, John, thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, and God bless you and all your listeners. Thank you so much for having me, and just keep listening and believing. There's a lot more music coming. That's the mission. I'm behind it. I'm helping steer the wheel, and we can't wait to get more music out to you. Thanks so much for having me on your show.
Yeah, there he is. John Krondes, A Dream for Peace. Here it is. It's KIX 96.5.